Hey there, everyone. This is Erica Merrill. I'm the founder of Perfect Legal Video, and I have the distinct honor of being in the company of attorney Joseph Nivin out of New York City. And we are always working hard in the times when people want to just leave work. And today is like the day before Thanksgiving is like the biggest night of the year to go out and have fun. But here we are, burning the midnight oil. Well, it's almost midnight oil when you consider it's a holiday. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Today is going to be a really interesting topic. And I'm sure lots of people have this question. We are going to be talking about what happens when you're paying child support and your income goes down, whether it's you get hurt or you lose your job or you're underemployed for whatever reason. And so this is the topic that we're working on today. Want to start off with the question is, what happens if you lose your job and you're supposed to pay child support?
So it depends. I know that people hate it when attorneys say that, but in this case, it really does depend. If the person was laid off, or if the company went out of business, if the company lost a major contract, basically anything that's outside of the control of the person paying child support, then the person will probably be able to get the child support modified. However, if the person was fired for cause, meaning did something to get him or herself fired, or simply quit the job, then the person will be expected to pay the same amount of child support as if the person still had the job.
Well, that's interesting. You just answered 3 of my questions out of 4. That is definitely an interesting predicament you could be in. So number 1, you're saying if it was not really your fault, you might be able to get a break.
Mm-hmm.
But they'll probably take any unemployment into account. Is that right?
Yes, unemployment benefits are considered income for purposes of child support. So that is something that's pretty common scenario, is that there's someone that was laid off and then they're collecting unemployment benefits, then they'll simply pay child support as if the unemployment benefits were the income. Now, with that said, the person will be expected to look for another job at a similar level of income. So if someone just gets laid off and says, well, this is my ticket to stop paying child support, they're wrong. The court will want to see that the person is actually going out and looking for work, and work that's at a similar level as what they were earning before.
Wow. So what if somebody, this is not in your questions. I love throwing stuff out at you that are not in the questions, but you always answer it well. What if somebody is in the Army, let's say, and they retire early and, they just decide that they don't feel like paying child support, so they're just going to sit on the couch and collect their retirement?
Well, they usually get a pension, and a pension is income for purposes of child support. So, if the person was, let's say, in their early 30s, was an officer, then clearly they could have stayed in the Army. So I would expect that the court would expect them to continue paying. If the person was 60 years old, then that's a different story. But I would expect, I haven't had a case where someone was in the military, so I'm not sure off the top of my head, or at least not a child support case, the person was in the military. But so off the top of my head, I don't know how long you have to be in the military before you get a pension that's at the same level as what you'd be paid. But if the income goes down and the person clearly could have continued working, then I think the court would expect the person to continue paying child support as if they were still making the same level of income. But with that said, I do know that it's pretty common for people that are in the military to be able to get civilian jobs at the same or even a higher income level. So, I think that somebody in that situation would be well advised to try to get that.
A lot of them can get out at like 20 years in and do pretty well as far as like their income. So if they get in at 18 and they get out when they're 38 and they're retired, it's like, wow. So those people would they still have 20 more years that they could work and make a really good income. So they'd be expected to do that, is what you're saying.
Yes. I don't think that somebody would be expected, if they're a sergeant or something, to then end up paying child support if they're a lieutenant because they could have been a lieutenant. But if somebody simply leaves service and gets a pension that's much lower, I don't expect to be able to walk into court and say, well, now I just chose to retire. I should only have to pay child support as if my pension, which is much lower than what I was earning, was my income. I think, though, that if somebody were a sergeant, left, and then got a civilian job at the same level, it would probably be a bad argument to say, well, they could have been a lieutenant and make more than what they made in a civilian job, making the same income as if they were a sergeant.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's very interesting. I mean, so that's their prerogative to retire and not work again, but they can be expected to continue helping out with their children at the same level if they make. So that's interesting. See, I got a good question in there, and you didn't write it down. I'm thinking out of the box. I'm cheating. People ask me questions. Okay, so what happens? How do they determine? Like, so you get fired, and then you have to still pay the same amount. So they're basically going to ask the questions of your job and find out if you were stealing from the company or if you just kept coming in late or whatever the case was. I mean, is that what typically happens? Do they go to court for that?
Well, one easy way would be if the court asked the person, why didn't you apply for unemployment? Because when you apply for unemployment, if you were terminated for cause, you're not eligible for unemployment. If you get unemployment, then that means that you were not terminated for cause, and that pretty much means that it wasn't really your fault. But if somebody says I was denied for unemployment, that would certainly be a red flag.
Wow, that is really interesting. So what if you just, for whatever reason, you decide that you're just going to stop paying your child support?
Well, then you're in a really big mess. What happens is that, or what I tell people to do when they come into my office, is to go to family court and file to enforce the order of child support. This, of course, assumes that the order, that if the order was issued from the Supreme Court, they did not keep what's called exclusive jurisdiction. But in almost every case, you can go to family court and file a petition to enforce the order of child support. Now, the best case scenario for what's called the respondent, which is the person that stopped paying, that's being accused of not paying the child support, is that they walk away with just a money judgment, which also isn't so good, because a money judgment does accrue interest, and it really ruins your credit. Now, in extreme cases, the family court can actually incarcerate the person and issue what's called an undertaking, which is a certain amount the person would have to pay in order to get out of jail. But the person can be incarcerated for up to 6 months. Additionally, there are what are called administrative remedies. The person that should be receiving child support can get what are called enforcement services, and they can suspend the respondent's driver's license. They can revoke professional licenses. They can revoke recreational licenses. They can revoke passports. So there are certainly a lot of remedies. Additionally, if somebody goes to court and the court finds that the person willfully failed to pay the child support, which means that they didn't pay the child support even though they were able to, then the court actually has to issue an order that the person that stopped paying the child support pay the other person's counsel fees.
Wow. So now not only do you have to make up the money that you owe, you also have to pay for the mess that you put the other person in. You have to pay them back, and you have to pay any out-of-pocket expenses they had to pay for their attorney to take you back to court for you to do the right thing.
Right.
I mean, well, that's good, because anyone could just keep doing silly things and running up your very expensive lawyer bill, and
right.
There's no reason for it if they already know what they're supposed to do and they decide to do the wrong thing.
Right.
I mean, I've heard of people just not paying and then going on vacation with their new family.
Well, that's really stupid, especially if you put it on social media, which I know people do.
Yeah, people do a lot of silly things on social media, but not us. We're just out here educating people.
We're just the people that go to work and pay our bills.
That's right. So the last question I have on here is just if somebody does end up getting unemployment, and they decide not to pay, can the court take that unemployment benefit from them?
Yes. The court can issue what's called an income withholding order, and then your unemployment, a portion of it at least, would be garnished to pay for the child support.
I see. I mean, unemployment typically isn't a lot, but it's definitely something. And they can even work a little bit, I think, with unemployment. They can do some part-time work. So, I mean, hopefully the children get what they need to survive and everything. But I'm glad that the court has got their back. It seems like they always do.
Yep.
Now, do you have any interesting examples of some of these topics that we talked about today?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen a lot with this. I mean, I've seen people go through horrible things. I've had clients that have been laid off because they couldn't go on business trips because there were court dates. I had one client who had a very good job with the city contractor. It was a company that the city contracted with to provide services, and the city cut the contract in the middle of his divorce. Unfortunately, the court took sympathy on him, and he ended up getting another job at 2/3 of his salary, and the court was willing to lower his child support to reflect his new salary because they found that he still was making good income. In fact, it was widely covered in the news that the city stopped working with this particular company, so it was really not in dispute that that the decrease in his income was not his fault. So the court took sympathy on him. And the last thing, actually, I once represented an electrician and a union electrician, and it's pretty common for electricians to get what's called furlough, which means that when that crew gets a job and the job ends, that there might actually be a period of time when they don't have a job for that crew, and they get unemployment during that time. And I remember it was very unfortunate that before he could say boo, they started garnishing his unemployment when he was on furlough, which definitely made things very difficult for him. I mean, right now, I have a very hotly contested enforcement case. My client, unfortunately, has kids that are adults, and the father owes a lot of child support, and she's been chasing him for a very long time, and we're doing what we can to get it. It's taken a lot of work, but I think that we're there. So,
Wow. It's so they're adults now, but he owes back pay, and so you're just going to keep kind of trying to pay her back for all the extra that she had to pay when he wasn't helping out.
Right.
I have a question, actually. Throw another one out there since I've got you here for a little bit. I know that, like, I've heard of people, and I don't know if everybody does this different, but what if somebody makes a lot more money than they used to?
That there is a law saying that if there's more than a 15% change in income, or 3 years have passed, that you can go back to court and get a whole new order. A lot of people opt out of it, but assuming that you didn't when you settled your case, then you can go back after 3 years, or there's been a 15% change in income.
Ah, I see. I mean, I know that some people, I even heard of one couple that was not married that actually every 6 months traded tax information.
Every 6 months, what?
They traded tax information every 6 months.
Hopefully they weren't going back to court every 6 months.
Neither one of them made a ton of money, but because one would, get some extra part-time jobs, and the other one, I think, did a lot of contractor work. So it was never like a real steady income for either of them. So they were constantly checking in to see who should be paying more for the next 6 months, or, make changes where needed. You don't hear about that often?
No, not at all. That's the first time that I've ever heard that people exchange tax returns every 6 months.
Odd. Yeah. but typically people do it. I've heard of people doing it every year.
Yeah.
But
Well, that would make more sense. I mean, I've never had a case where we actually said you have to exchange tax returns every year, 2 years, 3 years. We never had anything like that. But I do know that the court does expect that if you are able to support your kids in a better way. I mean, what I've seen the court say, well, if you have been making this amount for this amount of time, I really hope that you set some of that amount for you, some of that aside for your kids. That I've seen.
so if somebody does hide it, like all of a sudden they make a couple $100,000 more than they used to, and they don't tell anyone, and you find out later, you have to bring them to court and figure it out. Those people typically pay in arrears?
No, you're only entitled to an increase going back to the time that you asked for the increase.
Ah, I see. So if you think that could happen, you should check in regularly.
I would say so, yes. If you think that the person will soon be making a lot more, then yes, I think that you'd be well advised to try to find that out.
You probably see more of the other case happening though, right? With people making less.
Yes.
And so those are always the sad times, but that means somebody's going to have trouble. Now that means both families might have some struggles ahead. So, all right. Well, I mean, this has been definitely really interesting. Definitely some information that I didn't know, and I'm sure some of the people out there have had some questions answered and some new facts brought to light. So this has been really great. I really appreciate your meeting with us on an afternoon right before Thanksgiving. I hope you and your family have a great Thanksgiving. I hope everybody watching has a great Thanksgiving. And again, we really appreciate your being here.
Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. All right, so we'll see you next week.
Yep. See you next week.
All right, have a good one.
You too.
All right, bye-bye.